Welcome to the show, Tony.
Thank you.
You've obviously braved COVID-19. You're in the office. I know you've been going into the office during this time, but fortunately now stage one restrictions have been lifted, and I guess the flip side of that is now there's more traffic on the road to contend with.
Yeah, it was a real rush to get here. Well, it was not a rush, but it was slower because there was more traffic. And also in Sydney this morning, we've got a fog. So
Ah,
I think everyone is getting used to driving and dealing with traffic. So it's actually a pleasant um, human experience to feel like everyone is coming out of hibernation.
yeah. I actually had a conversation with a friend a few weeks ago, and I just felt like I was still working and doing stuff, but it didn't feel like I was part of a bigger ecosystem of people doing things because you just, especially if you're working from home, you just don't see how you're contributing to the rest of the world, what your place is, what the pecking order looks like. There's no basis for comparison. It can start to feel like you're playing a video game after a while. So it's good to see the proverbial worker bees out and about doing things.
Mm.
So I'm really looking forward to unpacking the Booktopia conversation today, Tony. But before that, I'd like to go way back to college. And I know in college you were a big Space Invaders fan.
Well, I say that, but I I went I got 56% in my HSC
Yep.
and scraped into uni where I got into accounting and economics at Macquarie University. But
Hmm.
it was I always just say I mastered in Space Invaders and snooker and failed at accounting and economics and dropped out. But what I actually remember doing, there was a huge computer at Macquarie Uni called a VAX, and the VAX had on there this Dungeons and Dragons game
Hmm.
where, and you can still get to it on the internet if you search up Zork on iFiction, and it's a text based um, you know, W for West, East for East, I for inventory,
Yep.
U for up, D. So I would sneak into the computer rooms while the security guard was not looking and got kicked out at 2 in the morning. And it was that's what I actually was doing. And funnily enough, um, about 3 or 4 years ago, I invited to go back to speak in the I think it was the Macquarie Uni Business School's graduation day,
Hmm.
and I was the guest speaker, business entrepreneur, right? And it was actually in the hall, and just to the side was the room where I would sneak to go and play this game, which I, of course, then ultimately failed at university. So it was kind of a fitting full circle.
Yeah, that's quite an interesting story. Full circle back to the Zork room, but you essentially were studying computer programming and business, but you dropped out to travel for about 3 years. What did that 3 years look like? I mean, where did you go? Was there any sort of life learnings that came out of that, or was that more or less you being a 20-something-year-old just looking to have fun for a few years?
Look, it was definitely an escape. I left and I said to my parents, I'm going traveling for 3 years. So I had a
Hmm.
plan to go to all the continents and travel all the way around and work and whatever else. They actually gave me more money to stay away longer. Um, they figured that not living at home and all the food bills, it was cheaper for them to actually have me
That's great.
overseas. Um, but I went to Europe. I traveled through Europe for 9 months. I got back to London and I walked into a recruitment agency to try and get me a job as a computer programmer on contract for a few months.
Hmm.
And I'd been selling computers after I'd been doing COBOL programming, and so they said, what about selling people instead of selling computers? And I thought, oh, I'll give it a go. And I was very good at recruitment, so I ended up staying there for 2 years. And after that 2 years, I wanted to get traveling, and I got selected to go on a scientific adventure expedition to Chile for a 3 month thing called Operation Rally, which was for young people to go out and see the world and work
Hmm.
on projects. And that got me into South America, where I stayed for 8 months. I was on the expedition in the very south of Chile, working on a glacier and in the jungle. And then I worked in Santiago teaching English. And then I traveled through South America, North America, and came back home after 3.5 years. But I always say that my international travel from the age of 23 to 27 was my university degree.
Mm.
My skills in terms of communication, getting out of scrapes, earning money. It was all of the things that I needed to bring back and use as part of my business and whatever else. So that was my degree. I always call that my degree.
Yeah, no, that's like a personal MBA, and it also echoes what Robert Greene, the author of the 48 Laws of Power, says about your 20s and how your 20s should be like an apprenticeship. Go out there, try different things, learn different skills, do different things rather than pigeonholing yourself as, say, an accountant from day one, studying that in university and then going off and doing that for the next 20 or 30 years. That may work for some people, but there is a hell of a lot of value in doing what you did, as opposed to trying to force the square peg through the round hole that can be college for some people.
Yeah, look, I only found out 30 odd years later, only a few years ago now, that I had ADHD. My son was diagnosed with ADHD. My wife, his stepmother, kind of figured something was going on with him and so persisted. And, for me, he was just a normal boy. That's how I was. That's how he is. And so he was diagnosed, which then she said, after doing her Google doctor research, she said, I reckon you've got it as well. And so I went to a psychiatrist, and he said, nah, there's no way you've got ADHD. He said, look at Booktopia, so successful, blah, blah, blah. We spent an hour talking. He said, but before I make my final decision, could your wife come in? I'd like to have a conversation with her. And after about 20 minutes, he looks at me. You definitely have ADHD. and so the lesson or the insight is that there's a lot of it that explains a lot in terms of my inability to be able to concentrate in high school, 56%, failing at university, just the way that I operate. And with ADHD, you really just focus on what you want to do, and you don't really like doing the things you don't want to do. So when you're a husband and you've got chores to do, there's a lot of nagging. So as soon as I got diagnosed and I started taking Ritalin, my medication, there was no nagging. It was like, yeah, that's what you got to do. And so it explained a lot to me in terms of the way that my life kind of played out in those early years. If I would have been diagnosed, I think things would have been a lot different. But it is the way it is. I call ADHD a superpower. So for me, if I would only imagine that some of the greats like Leonardo, Michelangelo, Picasso, Van Gogh, who knows, maybe not, but to have that kind of obsession on something that you really are passionate about at the cost of potentially relationships and other things, your health perhaps, that you succeed. And so ADHD can be a superpower. You just have to understand it's kryptonite.
So it sounds like you succeeded because of ADHD, which predisposed you to certain behaviors that helped you in your life to get you where you are, rather than in spite of it. And, there's other conditions, whether it's, dyslexia or whatnot, that Richard Branson, from what I understand, he was diagnosed with that at a young age. There's numerous entrepreneurs who have these conditions, which, are supposedly not good for you, but the byproduct of that is it predisposes you to certain ways of thinking and doing that actually benefit you in the long run. So it's just interesting how that plays out. So you touched on the fact that you spent a couple of years in recruitment while you were traveling for 3 years, but you spent some time in the mailroom. I mean, it's a cliched thing where you start at the mailroom and you work your way up, but what did you effectively learn in the mailroom, Tony, that you still believe today?
So the mailroom job was me. So once I dropped out of university after I had finished all of Zork, and got through and became like a master champion or whatever all the points you could accumulate.
Yep.
I answered, and so I dropped out of uni. My parents said, well, you're going to have to work. And so there was an ad in the Sydney Morning Herald for a mail boy at the NRMA, which I applied for and I got. I was the email system. You remember the old days in the 80s, the movies from the 80s where they had the there was a like an envelope where the next kind of document would go in, and you cross out the person's name before, and you put the person that had to go to next,
Yeah.
and I would make my way around the building to drop off the next one. I was the email system of the in 1981, and what I learned there was that a positive attitude, like simply like coming in and being enthusiastic and friendly, and not being a grump, brought a lot of opportunities. So it wasn't that long. I was probably within a few months. I got cherry picked to move into one of the insurance divisions to start learning how to take on a more administrative role. So even at that level, bringing that kind of mindset and that attitude to in terms of being positive and outgoing and enthusiastic, created opportunities, and that hasn't left me. That was a pretty good foundation layer at such a young age, and I remember realizing that that's what I was doing. I was authentic. I wasn't faking it, but at the same time, I had a choice. I could choose to be that way, and by choosing to be that way, options and opportunities came to me.
No, it's a very stoic outlook, and I mean, we all have that choice. You either can become a victim if things don't go your way, or you can choose to take action and empower yourself. And that's over the long term. It's like compound interest. Good things happen. You attract good people, and one thing leads to another, essentially. But I guess that positivity and enthusiasm fed into your appetite for wanting to work with people. You mentioned you spent a couple of years in recruitment, but also you then went on to spend a good 15 years in various recruitment roles, also founding your own company, an internet recruitment agency, before people knew what the internet was. What can you tell us about that?
So I left the recruitment agency that I was working for in Sydney. So I'd been now recruiting, so from 87 through to 96, so 9 years working for other companies, and I decided I wanted to go out on my own. I'd gone to a few personal development courses and kind of / professional development with Robert Kiyosaki. I did the business school for entrepreneurs in Hawaii in 1993, so 3 years before I started my first company, and that was a 16-day course. When I started the company, I did it in the front room of my house. I had very, very little money. I had some kind of holiday pay and whatever things, commissions owed to me. So I vaguely remember it was around $25,000 to $27,000 at the time in the mid-90s. I got my IT guy in to set up my computer in the front room of my house. He did that on the first day. He went home and I turned it on, and I saw there was a thing called a browser. So I clicked on it. And I searched for jobs in Australia, and up came a website that advertised jobs for the IT industry. And I had about 8 jobs from my previous clients who said that they were happy to kind of give me the jobs, even though I was going out on my own. You can work on those jobs, no worries. And so back in the 80s and 90s, all of the IT recruitment agencies and IT companies would advertise their jobs in the Australian on a Tuesday with Rupert Murdoch. And he had a 64-page lift out. And my previous company, they were a listed ASX company. They would spend 10 grand a week advertising jobs, It's a lot of money over a year. I didn't have that kind of money. And the internet jobs website, so this was 2 years before Seek.com.au started. I was the third recruitment agency on Seek when they started. So they their thing was $100 a week for as many jobs as you want. So $10,000 a week versus $100 a week. $100 a week fitted right into my budget. So I basically went out and told people I was an internet recruitment agency, and then that's the first question they got asked was, "What's the internet?" And then my angle was, well, everyone else is advertising in the paper, but I'm advertising online, which is where all the IT guys are. So I'm going to get different candidates and give you some more options. And that was logical. Of course, didn't take too long, a year or so before everyone else was advertising online. But in the beginning, that was that was my angle.
No, it's you've got to have some sort of competitive differentiator. But I mean, you spent almost a decade working for other people before founding your own company and heading off to Hawaii and doing the business course over there. What was it that prompted you to want to move from employee to entrepreneur at the time?
I think being a salesperson, there was obviously you're building a business from nothing, and and my even though I was paid really well for a youngster in the early 90s, well over 150,000 a year, 160,000 a year, something like that was a fraction of the income that I was bringing in for my business. So I kind of felt like I could potentially get more of the pie. That ignorance served me. I'm sure many people who start their own company don't realize it's very different to showing up and having someone, write a check and have it, the money transferred into your bank account, versus running the whole business and paying for the rent and the advertising and the internet and all the costs that go involved. So that lack of knowledge probably served me. I would say I probably didn't have. If someone would have sat me down, I probably still would have done it. I still would have gone out on my own. But there's a lot of what you don't know that you don't know when you start a company. But I had this idea of Robert Kiyosaki talks about you build a company to sell it. If you choose to hold on to it, it's an asset that you're not working in that's giving you a dividend every year. And it was that kind of dream and aspiration to have those kind of assets, creating something out of nothing, which is the entrepreneurial thing. It's making the invisible visible is what probably motivated me, and I aspired to. There probably was, I can't really recollect now, but there was probably something like, I can do it better than you. Being in my early 30s, there was probably some aspect of that, but I can't really. When I think back to it at the time, I can't really remember that. Maybe I've just been humbled along the way, and that has been squished out of me. But there's got to be some aspect of like, I can do it better. Yeah. There's always, people talk about, which I do remember at the time, only 5% of businesses succeed after 5 years. That's something that I remember. I remember thinking about, well, I'm determined, I'm going to be one of the 5%. There was something there that was very much focusing on the horizon point. One of the things that I do talk about when I do my own public speaking is about when I first started my recruitment agency, and I had this in tray of bills, and every month that's where all the bills would go in, and there'd be the rent, and there'd be the internet and advertising and wages, and it would just sit there on my desk, and I'd look at it and I'd feel just sick in the stomach looking at all these bills, and it's like, and they just kept getting bigger as more people were joining, and I was just like, it was really debilitating, and I remember there's one moment where I go, hold on a second, why am I focusing on the bills? I literally, in my mind's eye, but also I did it physically in the room, I just focused around and I said, okay, where are the sales? And I put the bills behind me, and I just said, I'm going to focus on the sales, focus on the cash. And within 2 months, I was generating enough volume of cash to handle the bills. And there's a lot of that lesson on how we've kind of run our company over all the years, and to bootstrap Booktopia from a $10 a day business to we'll do 170 million in revenue this calendar year. Wow. So it's that focusing on where you're heading kind of thing, rather than simply all the things that aren't working, or things that potentially could make you come undone.
Yeah. And I think that positivity ties in with what you were saying earlier. I mean, it's easy for us as human beings to hone in on the negatives. In fact, we're wired to focus on the negatives, not the positives. And perhaps that's why there's so much negativity in mainstream news, because it keeps people hooked. But, if you've bought a property, you might focus on, I have to pay land tax now, and I have to service the mortgage and all this sort of stuff. But think about the rental income, or think about the capital gain it might create for you down the track. That's why you do it. If you don't want to pay the land tax and the interest and everything else, don't buy the property. It's the same with business and so many things. And if we spend too much time disproportionately focusing on the negatives, it can be quite debilitating. But I also love what you said there about the ignorance going into it. I think a healthy reality distortion field is almost a prerequisite to entrepreneurship, because most people get into it thinking, oh, I want to be like the entrepreneurs I read about in the newspaper, I see on the TV, I see on Instagram, whatever it is. But the work is real, and it's not easy, but it is a rewarding experience if you do go through it. And with your first business, so obviously was rewarding, because you grew it to a firm the size of about 35 people and sold it to a company listed on the ASX, which ties in with what you were saying about Robert Kiyosaki. You build a company essentially to sell it. Now, nowadays with Booktopia, you've got over 200 odd people in the organization. Are you still involved actively in recruitment?
In the recruiting of people within the company?
Yeah.
For the senior positions, yes.
Mm-hmm.
But mostly now I might be the third interview kind of role. It's more of meet the founder, meet the CEO kind of role that I would play.
Yeah.
I am here as a sounding board, though, for my management team, as they've interviewed people and they've got maybe a couple of people that they're tossing up between, and so they'll use me for that, just to clarify and crystallize their own thinking about, we just did one recently where one of my senior guys was hiring someone, and it was like, well, I've got someone that's got this kind of skills, and then someone else who's kind of come from this background, quite different, and we had to weigh them up and we went in one direction. So that's mostly where I've been involved today. The most important thing when I think about it, and I think about the beginning of the business, is about really trying to protect and maintain the harmony of the group.
Mm-hmm.
And that there's a little book called Zap versus Sap. I think it's ZAPP and SAPP, something like that. It was written it's one of those little kind of like Fish or Who Moved My Cheese or the 1 Minute Manager books. In fact, you don't even need to read it. The title says enough. Is that some people zap you, which I'm like when I was the mail boy at the NRMA, and some people sap you. So if people are taking your energy away versus giving you energy, then you want people that are going to zap you. You want people that are going to energize, who bring more energy to the group. They talk about synergy. The sum of the parts is greater than the whole, and it's that kind of. You don't want everyone kind of focusing their all energy on one person, and you got to whistle those kind of people out of the organization as best you can, because they're not suited to our organization. They're going to be suited to other organizations who are looking for that kind of critical kind of thinker, which is which can serve other company.
Yeah. No, I like to say that when you have that values alignment, it's kind of like trying to jumpstart a car with both people pushing from the rear. If you don't, it's kind of like one person pushing from the front, one at the rear. Either the car goes nowhere or someone gets run over. So either way, it's a bad outcome. But with recruiting people, apart from that ZAP or SAP philosophy and looking for values alignment, are there any sort of, you mentioned critical thinking too, but are there any sort of defining characteristics or underlying traits you look for in people to build a great company?
There's a few things there that I'll share. One, having been a recruiter and pinched people from one company and put them in others, the idea of trying to hold on to one is a really it's a recipe for disaster. So when someone comes in and resigns, to me, it's like, oh wow, where are you going next? Like, because if you don't want to be here, you must be doing something else amazing. Mm-hmm. So that idea even your key people coming in, which I've had key people come in and resign. It's just like, oh, God, I wish you all the best. Oh my God. And they were like, oh my, they were thinking, they were worried about telling me that they were going to resign and was going to, like there was this burden of, having to leave the family. And so, no. I'm very detached from holding onto people. And interestingly enough, people have been here for years and years. We've got one lady who's been here. We've been going for over 16 years. She's been here 15 years. We've got plenty of people over 10 years, tons of people over 5 years and 3 years. So people stay because they want to. The other thing about it, one thing about recruitment for me is that I really don't want to try and hire people who've been doing the same thing in one company and we need them to do the same thing here. And as a recruiter, I was told to do that, get me somebody who has been doing, this programming skills for 5 years, 3 years, blah, 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 and they've worked in these companies. So, where's their career path? When they go from there to here, what's the, where are they heading? Oh, we'll just pay them more money. And so it becomes mercenary.
Yeah.
And so my thing is like, I want to know that when someone comes in here, they're going to end up here. So they're going to be of more value to themselves, to their families, and to the community, and to the next business that they go into. So a lot of people have grown and developed through the organization, including myself. So that's super important to me about that idea of having people's. They worked at Booktopia, and this is where they got to. And we've got some amazing stories of people that came in at customer service and left at very, very senior management positions. It's quite extraordinary.
Yeah.
So there's a few other things that I do because we're out near the Olympic Stadium. Mm-hmm. Where do you live?
Well, I'm in Melbourne. So
no. I'll ask the person. Where do you live?
Okay, yeah.
Because I want to know. They've got to get up every day. They've got to get to the office, right? And they've got to get home. Is that going to work for them? So therefore, I just got to know that the practicalities of them working for us is actually going to serve them. Even though this could be the job of the century, if they've got to travel for an hour and a half here and an hour and a half home, that's, how are you going to do that? And if they say to me, look, I love to go on public transport. I've got no family, right? I listen to podcasts, or I love reading my book. It's my favorite time, other than in COVID, of course, but it's my favorite time. And I'm just so looking forward to that time to travel. And I go, okay, that's really going to work for you. That makes sense. I'm happy to support that. So understanding those things. And then, of course, what are their aspirations? Where they want to go? What if they could have the job that they really love? What would that look like? To work out, is there, oh, right, so you coming in a books kind of merchandising person, but their goal is to be a data person, and they're just passionate about data. Well, I go, okay, well, that's a possibility. We could give you access to that kind of career path in here. So to understand who they are three-dimensionally, not necessarily like this is a two-dimensional recruitment process. The other thing I do is I'm very, very fast at reading resumes. I mean, I've read hundreds of thousands of resumes over the years, of course, but spelling errors or formatting or things that, or timing of when they didn't, if there's dates missing, that's not something, there was a gap there that's unexplained. I don't have a problem if someone says they've been, they wanted to take care of their kids and they took time out, male or female, that they wanted to invest into their own children, that they were young. Like, doesn't bother me. But having gaps and not explaining yourself, those things always feel like, they're trying to hide something. So being as transparent as they can, for me, has always been important. I didn't pass university, so having a degree for me is mostly meaningless. I've never looked at any qualifications. I want to know who they are, where they've worked, and that's, I think that they're good. That's some good insights in terms of the way, having been in recruitment and recruited hundreds of people for my own business. Now that's 33 years of recruiting skills is a lot.
No, definitely. And I mean, a lot of what you've said there aligns with what Dan Pink wrote about in his book Drive, all about human motivation and the three big intrinsic motivators being autonomy, purpose, and growth, more mastery. And in your case, you've basically said that, you want your people to learn and to grow, and that can motivate them to want to engage with the company and stick around longer. And like you've said, you've got people there 10 plus years. Someone's been there 15 odd years, almost from day one. It's really important to invest in those intrinsic motivators rather than just pay people more, because then you end up with what Machiavelli said, and you put it well, mercenaries who will just leave at the drop of a better deal tomorrow, and they're not really invested in the long-term growth of that organization, which I think is really important. But, a really powerful recruitment question that I've come across before was, rather than asking people, what they've done before, they might say, oh, well, I was on this project and we achieved this. And like asking, well, why did you guys do that? Or how did you contribute to the success of that project? Because there could be 50 people on this project and they might have been a bit player, but understanding how they contributed really gets you to understand their thought process and what they really did above and beyond just being a member of the team. Are there any sort of questions that might come to mind, Tony, around really digging deeper to get that sort of insight out of someone?
Every situation is different. So when I do my public speaking, the first nugget that I share with people is that the quality of your life is determined by the quality of the questions you can ask. And you get to ask better questions by being more experienced. Like a doctor is going to ask better questions than I could ever ask, or a paramedic, or an architect, or a nurse, or a teacher. So in the terms of what you're doing, there's one guy here who loves to put his interviewees on the spot. Mm-hmm. He heads up logistics and supply chain. He's very good at it, very, very good at it. And he needs to know, how's this person going to kind of operate when the proverbial's hitting the fan. He needs to put them under a little bit of pressure in the interview room, because he wants to make sure that, that was a prickly question, and that was a very considered and well thought answer. That doesn't have to be right. There's no right or wrong. It's like, well, how did they respond to that question? What was their thinking like? Mm. How did they feel about being asked a difficult question? Were they slightly on the back foot and being offended by that kind of line of questioning? I'm not that kind of person. I find that quite difficult to do. But I'm more interested in probing into other kind of scenarios that may be equal, perhaps in their family life. It could very well be you're putting on a party for 30 or 40 people. How would you go about resourcing? Would you just outsource it to somebody? Would you get involved? What happened on the day? Maybe there's an example of how I would get an idea of how they might operate in that certain kind of environment. Mm-hmm. But most of the time at the senior positions, if I think back over the last 3 or 4 years of any senior positions that we've appointed, it's really about getting to know them as a person. How are we going to operate together? How are we going to communicate? I don't mind the interview going on for a long period of time. It's a great investment. It's important to feel like I know who they are. Trust my intuition. Intuition. I mean, it's intuition in training. So you're taking all of these life experiences and you're putting them in your gut. So as things come up, you've got to really rely on your training, on your intuition, on your previous experiences to get a feeling whether that person is true to their word or whether they're going to fit in here. So there's a lot of intuition that comes into those kind of interviews.
It's interesting. I read a study that was published in HBR recently on intuition, which found that you need roughly, and I don't know how they quantified this, but 10 years of domain-centric expertise to really hone that intuition. So those experiences that you spoke of, Tony, getting them to a point where you can trust that intuition. Whereas if you're trying to make a decision about someone for a role that you have no real knowledge of, or you've not really spent much time in recruitment, perhaps your intuition isn't going to be that sharp just yet. So it's just a sidestep there. But let's going back to your journey, let's fast forward to, say, February 2004. This is when you founded Booktopia. But from what I understand, you started Booktopia on a $10 a day budget, and it was initially just a side project. What can you tell us about those days?
Mm-hmm. So we were, and when I say we, I'm in business with my brother and my sister, my brother-in-law,
Mm-hmm.
and we had a internet marketing consultancy. So once we had sold the recruitment business, we had this chat software business because we were chatting to our candidates while they were at work, and rather than running out onto their mobile phone to talk about a job, they had this secure and encrypted chat session, which there was no app to download or software to download. So we built this software and expecting to make our fortune with this new chat software product because the dot-com boom of the late 90s. When the dot-com crash happened and we were going under, we couldn't pay ourselves a salary, I asked a web designer, how do you get to the top of Google? Because Google had been going for a few years and someone did a search for chat software, maybe we make a few more sales. And he told me what to do, and that quickly led into us morphing from a chat software business into a surviving and then thriving SEO, internet marketing consultancy. And it was a project in 2003 that we had done to get Angus and Robertson to the top of Google, and they outsourced their website to a company in Sydney that managed the site for them, fulfilled their orders, and at the end of every month, this company cut a check and sent it across to Angus and Robertson and said, "There's your commission for all the sales that were made." And this company managed 80 bookstores' websites. So my brother, who had worked on that project, set up a meeting at Christmas of 2003 to introduce us, to say to the owners, "Hey, by the way, we've done a good job with Angus and Robertson getting them to the top of Google. Why don't you introduce us to your other clients, your other customers, and we can get them all to the top of Google. You'll make lots of money and we'll get more project work."
Mm-hmm.
And the owner of the company said, "No, I'm not interested." I said, "You're not interested in making more money?" He says, "Look, it's not our business. We manage bookstore websites and we fulfill those orders. That's what we do." I said, "Well, how does it all work?" And they said, "Look, we've built a platform. You give us the name of your store, and within 10 minutes, we can have a bookstore website up and running with your bookshop name up the top and 1 million books on there. And if you sell anything, we pay a commission." I said, "Well, that sounds interesting." And they said, "Yeah, I know it does, but really the bookstore website, the traditional bookshops that wanted a website, they're the ones that make money. The online ones that no one's made anything." I said, "Okay, fair enough." And I went away from that meeting and I said to my brother, "I wouldn't mind giving that book thing a bit of a go. It sounds quite interesting." So it was Christmas 2003, and I'm trying to come up with a name of a bookshop, and I wasn't happy with the names I was coming up with. It was really irritating me that I just couldn't think of anything that was going to suit. And I was in the national parks of New South Wales on a really hot Australian summer's day.
Mm-hmm.
Insects were screaming at the top of their lungs, and I turned to the person I was with and I said, "It's like that movie Ants, where the insects talk about this place called Insectopia. Booktopia. That'd be a good name." Of course, back in 2003, we were still on dial-up modems. You remember the sound of a dial-up modem? Right? That's it. And so I couldn't just get on my phone and go, "I wonder if Booktopia is still available." I had to wait a whole week till the camping trip was over to get back home, turn on the computer. Yes, it's available. Buy the URL, register the business, ring this company, say we're going to start our own online store, Booktopia. Sure enough, within 10 minutes, there was a website with Booktopia's name up the top. And our SEO company address in North Sydney on the website with the phone number of our SEO company. And then my brother says, "All right, you can work on Booktopia. It's got to be outside of hours." So I did from 9 p.m. till 2 a.m. every night. And then and I'm giving you a budget of $10 per day to start the company. Now, because I was a Google AdWord expert and I really knew how to use Google Ads, I didn't just go for the search term bookshop and bookstore and books because I knew my $10 would be used straight away. I wrote ads for authors and titles. So I would send them, someone would use Google to do a search and I would have my ad and then it would send them deep into the site where those books were, and then they would match up the user's search query to what they were looking for. And so it took 3 days to sell my first book, and that was the total sales for the day, one book. And by the end of the month, I'd done $2,000 worth, about 60 orders of sales. And then by fourth month, I was up to $30,000 a month. By the end of the year, $100,000 a month. By the end of 2 years, $200,000 a month. And so because we had all this SEO, internet marketing consulting work, we didn't need to pay ourselves any salary out of this business. It was all reinvested. So every time I would increase revenue and have more commission, I would plow that back into writing more ads, which then generated more revenue.
Mm-hmm.
And it was that lady that I said who joined us, who's been with us for 15 years. So she joined us while we still had the internet marketing consultancy, and then we hired another customer service person to take those inbound calls for that business. So we had 2 people after 3 years. And it was then that we decided to part ways with that other company. It was a $2 million business. We thought someone might want to buy it. And if someone did any due diligence, and having sold our recruitment company to a company on the ASX, we had gone through the due diligence process. It was pretty obvious that someone wouldn't want to buy Booktopia because we're just like a marketing front. They'd want to buy this other company managing all the bookstore websites. That was the one to buy. And so we knew we had to build our own site and do our own fulfillment. And because my background in IT and my brother-in-law was an IBM software engineer, we kind of had the confidence that we thought we could build our own site and do our own fulfillment. So we parted ways with them, took a little 500 square meter warehouse in Artarmon in Sydney, right next to a brothel. So you can imagine the kind of,
clientele,
environment and the price that we could afford.
Yep.
It was very simple. And we bought some shelves on eBay, and those shelves arrived on the back of an 18-wheeler that the guy, when he pulled up from Queensland, says, "So where's your forklift to get these off?" And we say, "Well, we don't have a forklift." He goes, "Well, you can't carry them off." So we're running around the streets talking to other businesses. Has anyone got a forklift? Has anyone got a forklift? And we hired a warehouse manager. We rang all the publishers and we said, "Look, it's us, it's Booktopia. We're turning over $2 million a year." And they said, "Never heard of you." Because all our orders were going through this other company. So we had to set up basic terms, basic discounts, and kind of get going from there. So that's gives you a good idea of how it all started out. No plan. There was no light bulb moment or vision. There was just simply, let's just try that and give it a go. And by focusing on the one thing we talk about before, asking the quality of your life is determined by the quality of the questions that you ask. The one question that we ask every single day and still do is, what do our customers want? And by asking that question and answering it, you continue to take a step closer to fulfilling the needs of your clients. And what we were doing was no one else was doing. It's amazing that we're now at 170 million and the second largest online bookstore in Australia that is Australian, so not including any of the internationals, is turning over 20 odd million. So, and we were all at 4 or 5 million, just that we kept going further and further and focusing on getting better and better. And we ended up much farther down the track than anyone else.
Yeah. Now, I love that story, especially because so many, want to be entrepreneurs, wait for that great idea, but more often than not, you just go on that journey, you start something, it might do okay, but through that process of actually doing stuff, new roads present themselves that perhaps would have been invisible previously. And then you just go down that road. Let's see what's down there. And as you did, evolving from the SEO company to Booktopia. So, I think just start for those entrepreneurs or want to be entrepreneurs listening to this who perhaps are just waiting for that great idea. Most ideas aren't great from day one. You just got to go on that journey and evolve it into something that may be great one day. So nowadays, like you said, Booktopia pulling in over $170 million, 200 people employed. You're shipping or selling something like a book every 6 seconds. It's phenomenally successful. And you've done all of this without external investment. You just kept reinvesting the revenue into growth. I mean, was this a intentional decision, or why did you choose to just be a cash flow driven business rather than seek capital from the markets?
So we that needs to be divided up in a few ways, because we did our first capital raise in January this year of 20 million.
There you go.
And so the thing about it is that in any business you need cash to come in to be able to pay for things. So I'm a very horizon point driven person, and therefore, anyone who's starting out their own business, don't think about a mountain range beyond the first mountain range. just get to the top of that mountain range so you can go, all right, I'm there.
Mm-hmm.
Now, where's the next mountain range? And you got to reset and go, all right, now I'm going for that one. The idea of Booktopia being a $300 million business and a $500 million business is there, but right now it's to get to $200 million. And so that's my goal. It's another 30 odd million on top of what we're doing right now. And so you don't have to think about anything beyond that. And everything that you do is focused around that. So the reason why we didn't raise any capital was because no one wanted to give it to us. We did actually try an IPO in 2016, and the week that we were getting ready to list and the price was, the prospectus was done, we'd spent a few million on kind of getting ready. Mm-hmm. Amazon announced they were coming to Australia, and all the fund managers of all the investment banks, oh, well, you're going to be annihilated. And so no one wanted to invest. No one wanted to go with our IPO. So back to the drawing board. We've got to get bigger. Mm-hmm. So I always knew that we would get investment. And the longer that it took and the easier that we made it, that people could see that we were, we could see who we were, but it takes sometimes a lot. The world is flat. The world is flat. No, the world is spherical. Mm. And it would have taken a lot of agreement from many people to actually and finally get there's still a few out there who think the world is flat, but there's that the world was round. It would have taken a lot of agreement around many communities and many government departments and many religious institutions to finally get everyone to go, actually, you're right, the world is spherical. Mm. And it's a little bit like that with investment. When you just keep getting bigger and bigger, it doesn't matter. Like, we actually didn't need the money in January. We don't need the money. We actually didn't need it. We would still get to 300 million and 500 million. But to have the money and to bring on these strategic investors, we can get there faster. Mm-hmm. We can get the confidence of many of our suppliers. So it just changed a lot. The idea of doing a capital raise to get your business going and you don't have the cash to fund your business is something that I would never feel comfortable with. And I would try and leave all that money in the bank until I got, I would be very, very ruthless around spending until the cash was coming in. So I'm a very cash-driven entrepreneur. People need to be handing over money to be able to fund your business. Yeah. And so even in the early days, it was like, I really need this kind of marketing person, or I need this kind of book expert, or we need this kind of person in the distribution center. It's like, okay, well, how many sales a day do I need to be on to afford that person? Mm-hmm. Right, we've got to get to there. All right, put the effort in and get to there. Right, now we can afford that person. And that's how you get. We're actually probably at around 260 employees now, not 200. So yeah. It's really around that. It's about having more money at the end of the month rather than more month at the end of the money.
Yeah. I agree so much, mate. It's just so many entrepreneurs nowadays, especially younger 20-somethings, focus almost exclusively on capital raising from day one, not realizing that, hey, man, how about just trying to build a business where someone will give you $1 to validate that what you're doing is something people actually want, and then using more of those dollars to build a bigger business. And then if you still need to raise capital, you can do so at a higher valuation, give away less of your business, work with more seasoned investors who can help you get further faster, rather than just trying to raise capital from day one. And
it's tricky, Steve, because the thing is that sometimes with some of the apps and things that these guys are doing, they need to, time is of the essence. You need to get the thing up and running super quick. But it's kind of like, the way that I think about those businesses, it's like mining, drill, nothing, drill, nothing, drill. It's a little bit, right? Drill, right. Look at this vein, and we can take that for years and years and years. So it's that risk of getting money in to people to invest in an idea. The reason why people like that is that dollar could end up being $100. I was reading the other day about Malcolm Turnbull. He put $500,000 into Aussie Mail in the mid-90s. This is probably just after he was doing all of his investment banking, or through that and all of his contacts. And that 500,000 ended up being 50 million. So he got a 100 times return, which then set up his capital base, many times over. And it's if that's your gig, if that's what you're doing, you better get that, get it built. Don't think about marketing. Do not think about parties and launch parties and huge entertainers and lots of alcohol and no, it is not done until it's built, right? And you are working so you've got your Series A and you've got to there, and you've probably got a Series B, Series C, and Series D that you need to be thinking about. But all of that, extra stuff and the expensive cars or the lovely offices with all of the extras, forget about that. You are as a baby in the womb, right? You are not birthed until you can breathe and live on your own. Otherwise, you're still in that could go either way phase. And so that's not my kind of entrepreneurship. But I know others have done extremely well and created much more wealth than I would ever consider. Because of that. I mean, I remember when Nick Molnar came in and mentioned, because he's good mates with my deputy CEO, and so who's my CTO as well, been with us for over 12 years, something like that. Yeah. And he told us about this idea that he had, like building a platform where people could make payments on, 4 easy payments over, and we'll give you, the online retailer, the money, and then the customer can just make 4 payments, and then we pay as part of the deal. The retailer pays for the insurance, which was Afterpay. So when he said that to me, and this is before it even launched, I said, mate, that's a bloody brilliant idea. Yeah, we'll be in for that. That's genius. Now, I couldn't have come up with that. It's simple, but he could. So there's, don't necessarily need to have all that revenue coming through in the beginning. I really endorse and encourage anyone to pursue something that they have, but being able to be very focused on when is it going to be functionally operational. They talk about pre-revenue, pre-profit, right? It's like, you're pre-revenue, and now you're pre-profit, and just keep working towards that.
Yeah,
I know there's a lot of .coms that have not made it to pre-profit, and they're doing hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. And I think if you are going to raise capital from day one, particularly from, say, angels or VCs, just be in it for the long game, because they're going to be looking for significant returns on investment. Like you said, with Malcolm Turnbull, when you do invest in early stage innovation technology companies, you're looking for that $150,000 to become $150 million. You're not just looking for a 2x return or a 7% annual return that you might get with property. You're looking for some big returns. And for the investors potentially listening to this, you've got to cast a very wide net, because a lot of, say, less seasoned investors in the space might invest in 1 or 2 startups thinking that's going to be their ticket. But you got to cast a very wide net, 10, 20, 25 startups that have, you've done your DD on, and if one of those hits a home run and 24 losses, then you've done well. So we're almost out of time, Tony. So I guess one thing that I wanted to touch on before we do wrap up is, the book landscape has changed so much over the last 20 years. Borders have come and gone. A lot of sales are taking place online, but we still do have the likes of Dimmicks with a few flagship stores around Australia doing reasonably well. Obviously, Amazon moving in 2016 to Australia. But your business still keeps growing. It's growing from strength to strength. I mean, what do you think is the key to that resilience?
Books are here to stay.
Yep.
I remember in 2008, I was at Book Expo America, and I got I got the opportunity to sit in a session where Jeff Bezos was talking to a guy by the name of Chris Anderson, who wrote a book called The Long Tail of the Internet. And in his book, The Long Tail of the Internet, Jeff started to go on in this session. He started to talk about this new device that he had called the Kindle. Mm-hmm. And I'm sitting in the audience, and it was the first I'd heard of ebooks. And for the hour, all he did was talk about the Kindle and ebooks. And I walked out of there completely shattered. It's like, we're screwed. It's that's definitely going to happen. And as I'm walking my way down through the LA Convention Center, almost in a drunken stupor, going, "Oh my God, we're over." I thought, hold on, let me just think this thing through. And I remember standing there still for 10 minutes in this hallway while people just walk past me. That's a device. The Koreans, the Chinese, the Japanese, they're all going to copy that device. The publishers, they hate Amazon. So all those digital files of books they're going to make them available to everyone. And within 10 minutes, I could work out that's the future. We don't have anything to worry about because we'll be able to get access to the devices and get access to the ebook files. And so as that started to build momentum, it was clear after a while that not everyone actually liked to read on an ebook. It was actually time away from the screen was super important. So I could see that, yes, ebooks were going to have their place, but they weren't going to take over the physical book. And so books are very resilient. Books have been the printed book is 550 years old, and books have been around for 2,000, 3,000 years. So I was not worried about books because you're either escaping or you're educating. We found out in 2008, 2009 that we were recession proof. We could see that people switched from escape to self-education, and we're proven in 2020 that we're pandemic proof. And so the books are here to stay. And people think about, you look at the books, I know you're using some sort of fake screen behind you there, but
that's
there's a lot of
a photo of my actual bookcase, but it's just easier to record from here. Anyway.
But the point is, there's a lot of books there that people go, yeah, that's, like, it's a boring book. The Goodnight Moon is a kid's book, board book, that was written in 1947. And out of curiosity, I looked up the other day. I wonder, I thought, so how many? Because someone had written a parody version of it on one of the book. I got on one of the book feeds called Goodnight Zoom, and so Goodnight Moon, 48 million copies, selling 800,000 copies a year. Over 70 years later. And so I remember reading about To Kill a Mockingbird. The author, Harper Lee, at the time of her death, was earning $9,000 US per day on a book that she had written 50, 60 years before. And so people don't, when they think about books, they always think about, it's the new bestseller or the new big book. There's these other books that are selling many more times over every year that are just boring to the publishers because the publisher wants to talk and rave about this new big author that they've discovered or one of the new big books. But that's not it. The book industry has got books on law, on medicine, on how-to books, on gardening, on fishing, on how to learn a language. There's all these are all the books that make up the industry. Take the Arnold Schwarzenegger one there. His encyclopedia of bodybuilding. That sells so many per year. You wouldn't believe how many. And it's a brick. It's huge, right? Good to Great there on my top left. Like, that is a constant seller. All of these books are selling all the time, but people don't realize that that's what's funding the whole industry. All these books that were written years and years ago that continue to tick over. And that's why when I thought about the book industry, I thought it's very, very resilient. And it is proven to be an essential item through the pandemic. People have been reaching out for it. And that's one of the encouraging things in terms of investment, in terms of investing in Booktopia.
Yep.
One of the things that the investors who invested in January, which they may not have invested only 2 months later, once the pandemic hit, but they've soon discovered that actually was a very, very prudent investment, and our future is very bright. And books are, the book industry beyond us is very, very, very bright.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, especially when it comes to not spending that time you have to read books staring at screens, because I think the average person stares at screens for 11 hours a day. And the last thing we need is to sit down on the couch in the evening and stare at screens for another hour or some more when we're trying to read Good to Great or maybe Arnold Schwarzenegger's encyclopedia of modern bodybuilding. But just on that, the last lightning round question I will ask you is, what's one book that's had a profound impact on how you navigate the world, Tony?
So I would say Brené Brown's Braving the Wilderness. When it comes to, and I listened to her do that book. I didn't read it word for word. I actually did the audio version. That's a recent one that was really profound. All of Brené Brown's stuff is really amazing. So Malcolm Gladwell as well gives me a lot of kind of three-dimensional perspective on the way things are, and has helped me a lot. You've got New Power just over your shoulder there as well. So I know Jeremy, he's the younger brother of a friend of mine. So even though he's based in America, that's also a very good book. But from a personal level, because I like business parables, I'm more into like The Prophet, Jonathan Livingston Seagull, any of Richard Buck's books. It's that kind of A Little Prince. They're the ones that just, or anything by Paulo Coelho.
Yeah.
Those are the ones that are just kind of help me reset and reframe. Is more how I operate, and it's good to get into the detail of very technical books, and they're all very informative. But most of my DNA is around how I show up in the world and how I think in crises, and COVID is a great example where no one had any kind of preparation plan, or like, let's pull out the document and let's have a look through how we're going to deal with this. We talked about intuition earlier on. It's like, well, what experience can we draw on here? How does it feel about having people work from home? What are we doing with our health risks? What are we doing in terms of the industry and our supply chain? And it was just a lot of very big sweeping decisions in a very, very short space of time. So they're the kind of books that have probably and subtly made the most impact on me.
No, fantastic. Well said. And, I'm a big fan of Paulo Coelho's work, particularly The Alchemist, which I think has a lot of lessons in it for entrepreneurs about going on a journey and letting the roads present themselves to you rather than knowing where the treasure is from day one. Thank you so much, Tony. This has been an absolute treat. People can, of course, find out more about Booktopia and perhaps pick up a copy of a book, maybe The Alchemist, over at booktopia.com.au. Is there anywhere else you'd like to point out our listeners, or is that pretty much the place to be?
Booktopia.com.au. We also own Angus and Robertson. We bought them in 2015. So now we can say we're 134 years old. So
love it.
Booktopia, and also at the moment, you can try one of our audiobooks. We've just partnered with Kobo, one of the world's biggest digital, the alternative to Kindle, and so listening to a book as well. I do a lot of listening, and if I wasn't listening to books, I wouldn't be getting to read as many as I do, and so for people to think about that, I highly recommend it.
Fantastic. We'll add that to the show notes for our listeners. Thank you so much, Tony.
Thanks, Steve.